Yes.
Okay, so your interface of people and policy. So I guess the question is, what is the Free Market Foundation's role in South Africa? My understanding is that obviously you're an independent think tank. How do you aim to inform policy without becoming the politicians, if I can ask it that way?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question that you're posing. But very briefly, the Free Market Foundation, as you've just stated, is a policy think tank. It's an institute
Mm.
that is apolitical, politically neutral. And so, implied in our name, the Free Market Foundation is our paradigm that informs how we impact on policy or influence the direction of policies that are contemplated in Parliament, being discussed, and those that are already in place. So we engage them from that perspective of the free market. Now, the free market paradigm is just simply defined in terms of economic freedom, protection of private property, allowing people the freedom to choose, the right to choose, and with the personal choice comes with the personal responsibility
Mm.
and people being allowed to compete quite freely in the economic arena. And of course, another crucial principle that informs the free market paradigm is voluntary exchange,
Okay,
as
so
opposed
it's
to coercive engagements, usually by government, for example.
yeah, usually by government, of course. I suppose you can add monopolies to that list sometimes as well.
Oh yes, oh yes. But there is such thing as a natural monopoly, and
Yeah.
that comes, yeah. With monopolies. Oh, yeah, I said enough about that.
Yeah, no, definitely. So I guess the theme I wanted to cover tonight is property rights, and as you know, property rights is very intertwined with the history of South Africa. Just to take into account the listeners, some of them are international, but since the founding of the Union of South Africa after the Anglo-Boer War, um, the majority of the population was relegated to 10% of the land. Later on, it got a little bit bigger, but it was nothing substantial. And as time went on throughout the last century, there was systematic disenfranchisement of the native population until about 1994. And yet, my understanding is today there's still some laws in South Africa that is a large extent the ghost of the past, or even their new type of laws that prohibits private property. Can you maybe give us the idea of the history of the countries in private property, and then where we are currently?
Yeah, maybe I should go back in history by stating
Mm.
that in 1894, I think it was, the Glen Grey Act was passed. This was during the colonial era. And then in 1913, it was the Natives Land Act that was enacted. Both these acts were very pernicious in terms of their objectives, which was to emasculate economically the native population as described in those acts, meaning the blacks.
Yeah.
And so that was very, very successful. But the most pernicious of these pieces of legislation, there were others that consolidated this agenda. But the most pernicious of these was the Natives Land Act. The Natives Land Act effectively nullified, got rid of, and did not prevented black people from owning fixed property, as in land. And
Right.
the motivation, the reasoning behind that was that blacks were needed by the agricultural sector and also in the burgeoning mining sector. And so that was the agenda. And so that was really effective. And so there were many people from the black sector championed the cause against the Natives Land Act. One of the most prominent being Saul Plaatje, who wrote the book Native Life in South Africa. It is it is a sobering book for anyone to read, especially being right now in South Africa at this point in time. The expropriation of land without compensation proposal is being debated in Parliament, which ought not to be the case because there is a kind of deja vu about the expropriation of land without compensation when one thinks of the Natives Land Act.
And Saul
Now,
Plaatje, to my understanding, was one of the founding members of the ANC. I believe it wasn't called ANC at the time, but it would eventually
it
come.
was,
So
it was, yes, it was known as the South African Native National Congress. Yes,
mm,
that is what it was called at the time. With the passage of the Natives Land Act, if my memory serves me well, and I want to quote him directly, he said the following words, and this act was passed on the 20th of June, 1913. He said, "Awaking on Friday morning, the 20th June 1913,
mm,
the South African native found himself not actually a slave but a pariah in the land of his birth."
right.
Those were his words. And also the very same sentiment was echoed by another member, Mr. Dambuzu, who was a member of the South African Native National Congress, a precursor to the ANC. And he said words to the effect that, with this legislation, and I'm not going to be able to quote him verbatim, but he had said words very poetically to the effect that this legislation, meaning the Natives Land Act, there is winter in this legislation. In winter, the trees are stripped and have no leaves. Words to that effect.
Right.
And so one can see how vehemently these champions were opposed to the passage of the act. And any rational, right-thinking black person, or even a white person at the time, can't have not comprehended what the impact of that was going to be. Because if you deny people ownership of property, their private rights, that is, how are they going to embark on the road to economic self-empowerment?
Yeah.
And nevertheless, the act was passed, and with the apartheid era kicking in from 1948 onwards, all that was done under apartheid was to consolidate this agenda, and they came up with more laws and more regulations, mostly being informed by what had been started during the colonial era. Now,
Right.
with the advent of an open political dispensation, democratic dispensation in South Africa, before the first democratic elections, the economy was opening up, and
Mm,
so many of these pernicious policies were being dismantled. But now, currently, we are faced with a situation as a consequence of those laws, those policies, with a situation where, according to our educated guesstimate, there's something like between 5 and 7 million
mm,
households that are still occupied by people, having been occupied from generation to generation, that are eligible to have title deeds, and this is where the Kalam project kicks in.
right. So I want to still get a little bit on the history before I get to the Kaya project, because as we know, the 1994 comes, many of the apartheid rules are rolled back, or they are just not respected anymore. Yet, at the same time, the ANC comes to power, and the ANC has always been a coalition of various minds. But at the time, there was a debate what direction the country should go into: socialist debate, a communist future, a capitalist future, a mixed model, something of the sort. And yet comes Nelson Mandela out of jail. He initially, my understanding, spoke a little bit in favor of nationalization, but later he changed his mind. I suspect partially under the influence of Thabo Mbeki. And during, Mbeki's era, we actually succeed in South Africa to create a black middle class, which is now, depending on who you read, about the same size of the white middle class, right? But yet the question of land is constantly revoked in South African discourse. Is that a correct sort of assessment of the situation? And then, from there we can get to
Well,
KLM maybe.
I'd say a very fair sort of situation in terms of depicting the state of affairs prevailing around that time. But however, just let me just mention something that
Mm.
Mandela was a very pragmatic person, very, very pragmatic. And one of the things that now, when you're pragmatic, you tend to be more open-minded than ideologues,
Yeah.
right? Who are locked into their ideological positions, their perspectives, and seem to survey the political landscape from that perspective. Mandela had said much earlier on in his book, The Long Walk to Freedom, he had said, and I quote him, "A man is not a man until he has a house of his own."
Yeah.
Now, that is totally antithetical to the socialist paradigm. And so Mandela, just from that statement, one could sense that here was an open-minded person. Now, one of the things that the Free Market Foundation did very, very much earlier on in his administration was that we got a book from Milton Friedman that he, on his own, without being approached by the Free Market Foundation on that basis, felt that Mandela needed to be exposed to the free market paradigm. And he sent that book through, and I took it through personally to where he was staying and handed it over to him. Now, it could be that to some degree, that book had mystified the free market paradigm.
Yeah.
And even besides that, being an open-minded person, later on he had said words to the effect, while still president, that it is quite clear that the Free Market Foundation is the route to go. That is what he
Right.
had explicitly stated, and even in stronger, more explicit terms than I am relating now. So, a pragmatic person, and he was on the right path. Totally a non-ideological person, non-ideological,
Right.
but pragmatic in terms of what is in the best interest of the country.
Well,
That
the
was
other thing
Mandela.
to respect about Mandela is lots to admire, but he read a lot of books. I mean, he had a astonishing library of his own, even while in jail. And people who read a lot get different ideas. They're not stuck as an ideologue onto one idea. And as you say, pragmatism took hold. So in 1994, as the apartheid regime was coming to an end, the administration, at least in action, maybe not always in rhetoric, but definitely in action, they started de-rolling many apartheid laws, and they started expanding property rights to the cities. Black people could own land in the city for the first time, right? And that allowed the middle
Yeah.
class to be created there. But what went missing, I think, and this is now where I want to get into KLM, is that we tend to forget that there are still remnants of the past where people don't own land yet. And I think that is now where the discussion should unfold from is
Yes.
what is the situation around the cities at the moment, and where don't people own land, and why is the KLM so important then?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, everyone is free to purchase or to purchase land wherever in the
Mm.
country, within the metropolitan areas or outside of the metropolitan areas. However, the thing is, if one looks at the ANC, one cannot describe or define the ANC without alluding to the tripartite alliance, because by virtue of the tripartite alliance of which the ANC is part, it means that there are inhibitions, that there are constraints around what the ANC might be contemplating consistently with what Mandela had in mind in Thabo Mbeki, his successor as well. So that is the kind of situation that prevails at the moment. And but the point is, the worrying thing about the ANC itself is that they have not followed through with some of the policy directions, policy decisions that Mandela had embarked upon and had
Mm.
announced. And so that was the case with Thabo Mbeki. I'll cite just one example that's not relevant directly to the Kailam project, which is my home. Kailam is my home. This is it's the exchange controls that are still in place. Mandela had condemned those and said they're going to be phased out. And then that whole sentiment was echoed by Trevor Manuel and many others. And also Tito Mboweni, I think when he was governor of the Reserve Bank, yes, governor of the Reserve Bank at the time, but still, those exchange controls are still in place, though they have been gradually being phased. But the point is, they should be just simply dismantled overnight.
Right.
And but that does not have now. That illustrates the dilemma of the ANC in that they are very slow to implement policies that make sense, that are rational, that are based on what is in the best interest of the country, and that allows the socialist thinking and the interference to muddle those policies, and hence does nothing much seems to be happening. So that's the broad picture in terms of the
Yeah.
fact that there's some kind of policy stalemate within the ANC in terms of actually embarking on the right policies that have been the point of departure in terms of the path that Mandela had embarked upon and followed by Thabo Mbeki.
Right. And then, so it's interesting to me that sometimes the ANC says one thing and they do the another thing. Sometimes they don't move even though they say things. But be that as it may, I want to now get to the Kaya Land project. So you're telling me there's between 5 and 10 million, if I understood correctly, South Africans that currently live on the land that their parents and grandparents live on, and yet they don't own the land. So why is there this law still in existence?
Well, the thing is, first of all, the government owns a lot of land that it has described and acknowledged as being superfluous land. Sorry, on that same land, there are people who live on it. And what we say is the Free Market Foundation, please just simply hand over the superfluous land that is inhabitable to people on a means tested basis. So you identify poor families. And for me, this is very important personally. This should be on a non-racial basis. So you identify poor families on a rigorous means tested basis, and you hand over land to them on a one family, one plot basis. That's what you should do. Now, you would think that's very easy to implement because there is nothing that stands in the way of getting that implemented, that measure. But you can talk about how the ANC is very, very slow in terms of implementing just the right policies that are needed for the country to be launched on an upward socio-economic trajectory. But they're very, very slow, and sometimes one gets a feeling that there isn't really much enthusiasm for them to implement that because they have to look at their left flank in the context of the tripartite alliance. Who
Right.
do they see there? They see the SACP, they see the trade union movement, and that imposes constraints on them implementing the right policies.
Right. So, but the
But
interesting thing to me is that the members of the trade unions, um, I don't think they necessarily would support this. I mean, they are the ones who would probably benefit the most if land were to be transferred to them. And to get that message across, you can actually get more members or more votes for that matter just by giving people land.
yeah, I'll tell you what, that would be the rational sort of scenario that one would expect, crystallizing. But alas, that is not the case. Because the thing is, when you are locked into an ideological paradigm, you tend to, I know I've said this before, you tend to look at everything from that perspective very, very
Mm.
strictly, very rigidly. Yes, if you said to everyone, ANC that it is in the best interest of everyone, including organized labor, including political parties, including the whole country, that people should be allowed to own land, to own property, to own homes. They should be allowed to do that. Because, when you own property, the logic of ownership of private property is that you, the owner, when you make improvements on that property, You want to see the value being enhanced, and that unlocks a whole lot of things in terms of people's initiatives being based on a self economic empowerment basis. That's what happens. Now, uh, Hernando de Soto, in his book, in his seminal work, his book, The Mystery of Capital, states in a non-ideological, rational manner, objective that look, any property that is not titled legally is dead capital. It has
Yeah.
no economic significance whatsoever, none whatsoever. But when one simple thing happens, and that is that there is title that accrues to that house, to that home, to that property, and it's freehold title. All sorts of amazing things happen. The most important thing is that at the stroke of a pen, the house, the property, the land becomes an economic asset. An
Right.
economic asset just overnight at the stroke of a pen. This is the beautiful thing about the Kalam project in that it it acts as a catalyst for people to embark on a route of self-economic empowerment. Now, when you own a house, for example, that may have been occupied as tenants by your ancestors, your grandparents, your parents, when it becomes your property that is titled on a full title deed basis, the wonderful thing that happens is that, as I've said, you want to make improvements to the house. Nobody tells you what you should do. And you
Right.
find that naturally you aspire to adding another room to the existing house for all sorts of reasons. And then now, when you add a room to a house, one of the things that happens is that you have to employ a bricklayer, then a
Yeah.
plasterer, and you employ a carpenter. You employ all these various artisans from time to time, and they come along with their labor, let us say unskilled, whatever. But the point is, what happens is there are skills exchanges that take place. So the person who makes the cement, for example, the concrete, learns from the bricklayer and watches how the bricklayer, go about his work. And at some point, he's so becomes a kind of de facto apprentice because the bricklayer says, "I'll tell you what, I'm taking a break or something. Or come and see how I lay
Right.
these bricks, one on top of each other." There's a lot that happens that being catalyzed by only just one fact, and that is people having titled ownership of the house. And that is at the essence of the Kaila project.
Right. So the essence is, you say, debt capital following Hernando de Soto's theory becomes life capital. So people, first of all, they have an asset to their name now. So you own a house, you are 100, 200, 300 million rands ever richer. But at the same time, you now think differently about your house. So you would like to improve it. And then the economic activity follows from that and the transfer of skills. We have a very willing young population in South Africa. They want to have work. All statistics show they would take a work job tomorrow if they can, but they don't have the opportunity. And what goes missing here is that if land and title deeds are activated, so to say, a part of that problem will be solved as well. Probably not all of it, but a great section of it.
Sorry, I missed that last bit of the question that you're raising.
Yeah, I say so. If the capital goes from dead to live, we can not
Yes,
just we also solve a great part of our economic problems about the unemployment, especially in the country.
yes.
Yeah. So I'll get to the Thailand now. So how many titles have you transferred now in South Africa at the moment?
Oh gosh, it's very difficult for me to venture a figure because I'll tell you what, we rush from pillar to post, and I think something in the region of 5,000. But that might still be a conservative sort of guess from me. And
Okay.
the thing is, why this is it is so, it is because there's Perry Feldman, who is Mr. Kailam, so to speak, and he's responsible for the Kailam project and the land reform project of the Free Market Foundation. He's the one who's got all the figures up to date. And what we do, the rest of us, is that we knock on doors and motivate for the funding of the housing units, the
Mhm.
homes, so to speak. And then once that's been clinched and there's a commitment in terms of funding this initiative, then Perry Feldman kicks in. And Perry takes
Right,
over from that point, and he's the one who collaborates with the relevant municipality and other players and the legal firms that are responsible for the conveyancing of the properties, and he's the one who has all those figures. So
right,
Terry tells all of us that look, there's going to be a title handing over ceremony at such and such a place. It is 100 titles, it is 200 titles, 500 titles, that kind of thing.
right,
But it does keep us very, very busy indeed.
right. And do you, when you engage the politicians with this or the cities, do you get a lot of opposition in some places and support in others? Like, what is the reaction from authority?
Yeah, I'll tell you what. Yeah, the reaction from authority. Bear in mind that most of these properties that are eligible for titling on the basis of the Kailan project, most of these houses are owned by municipalities.
Yeah,
So we engage very intensely at that level of local government municipalities. And then from the very word go, we tell them that, look, we perceive you, relate to you as an administrative institution.
right,
The Kailam is politically neutral, and this is what we have in mind because you, the municipality, have a crucial role to play. You know how many people, how many units there are that are, for example, occupied on a tenancy basis. You've got the database. So let's work on that basis. So we've been able to depoliticize any potential sort of problems that might arrive. Because from the very word go, as I said, we tell them this is politically neutral and
right,
it's got nothing to do with politics. However, when one goes up the higher echelons of government, like at national government level, where you have various political parties, one can see that this project is problematic for the parties and individuals who articulate and embrace the socialist sort of paradigm, broadly speaking.
right.
But
Well,
that
that's
doesn't.
that's that's expected because I mean, I spoke to David Coltart here from Zimbabwe last week or week before that, and he made the point that in Zimbabwe they had land reform, but it wasn't really land reform. The politicians ended up owning the houses, and there was no titling given. And if Zimbabwe were to focus on titling, they could have solved their problems much better. And it sort of speaks to the same point here. You know, the politicians like to control the land. You know, because
Yes,
it's about power ultimately. It's power over those who they rule.
yes. Yeah, politicians have this inclination to want to control things, and so with ownership of a house, it's like the people will just be out there and not being subject to their control. There is that, for me, that's not necessarily confined to that kind of mindset, confined to the socialist
Mm.
oriented people. It also means that those who are control freaks
Yeah,
don't want to let go of the domain that where government held sway, for example. So there is that sentiment, but it's very easy. It's not really that difficult for us to really negate this and just simply say dismiss it as irrational because the focus is you want people, you want to bring about a situation where there's going to be a policy instrument that does not require government intervention, that's going to leave people to their own devices and leave them to be free to pursue their socio-economic goals and titling houses is one such important, significant measure that will achieve this.
Do you think it's possible for a country to create a middle class without property rights?
I don't think that's not possible at all. It is not possible because the middle class, by far are defined in terms of owning properties. And in few cases, they will rent properties, rent a flat, that kind of situation. But ultimately, ownership of property is what, in my mind, defines the middle class. But not also that. Not that's not confined to the middle class. Everyone, even poor people, aspire to owning property. They want to
Right.
live in the houses that they can call home, that they own legally. Everyone aspires to that. But the point is, the middle class comes about in that kind of situation where people are allowed the freedom to own property, where it's expedited, especially for people who come from the historically disadvantaged situation, as with the Natives Land Act. Those people especially appreciate that the whole initiative of expediting their titled ownership of homes is such a remarkable thing, remarkable initiative. Everyone wants to own property. Everyone wants. So Mandela said, you know, well, I don't want to reiterate what I've said,
Yeah.
but there are many people who in fact, all people. I cannot imagine anyone saying that they don't want to own property. I can,
Right.
for me,
Some
that is
people take a
zero.
decision to rent, right? But we all want something to own. Ownership, I think, is very
Yes, yes,
it, it's very into the human nature, I think, and it's just
that is without.
it just boggles my mind that you can have, especially rich people who own stuff, right? Who say, but these guys don't know how to handle their property. You sometimes hear that type of argument. They say, but if we give the poor houses, they're gonna um, go into debt, for example. What do you say to those people?
Oh yeah, the thing is, politicians have this very bad idea when talking about poor people in a paternalistic way. And they tend to say, well, if you give people houses, they're going to squander the property. They're going to sell it to everybody. But alas, the research does not reveal that. And also, anecdotally, very few people actually do that
Right.
and use it as collateral and then not be able to pay, and then the house is confiscated. Very few people do that. But however, there are those who actually do that. And they tend to do their best that they do not part with their property. And alas, in a few cases, they do. The properties are then confiscated and to the banks that provided the loan. So, but these are very few cases, very few cases. I don't understand why politicians, especially, tend to equate poverty with stupidity. The fact that people are poor does not mean that they are stupid. They are
Right.
rational and they can think through carefully. This arrogant attitude that poor people can't think for themselves. Well, we, the politicians, are the ones who should think for them in terms of what is in their best interests. There is such a fact. So it's a reality.
So, I mean, I think it's two things. First of all, I think the politicians never go to the poor areas unless it's election time, right? And then they just scream whatever noise to get elected. They get the small bit excited. But there is something else to it. And I saw it during this pandemic at Davos, for example, the world's 1%. So it's rich businessmen who had a poster coming out that said, you will own nothing and you will be happy. Now, you'd think it's incredible that some of the richest people in the world are saying that to them. What would you say to those guys?
Yeah, this is again one of those contradictions that are can label as just simply irrational and tragic. And
Yeah.
tragic. The people who become rich Especially also, this is the case in the West, in America. This one, you encounter this sentiment that at some stage when they are rich, right up there, they start to entertain interventionist policies, such as, for example, policies to address the problem, perceived problem of inequality.
Right.
Inequality, I mean, income inequality, and in a broader sense, just equality, socially speaking. They tend to go against what accounted for them to be where they are, namely having accumulated all that wealth and being rich. I think it's a sense of somehow feeling guilty about being so rich. But why should they feel guilty about being so rich? Because the point is, you become rich in an open economy by doing what? By delivering the goods that people want.
Yeah.
And on a competitive basis, and from the perspective of the consumers who consume the services, the products that you provide, they judge you and make decisions on the basis of what is in their best interest, namely good value for money from their perspectives. And so you become rich by by helping others. And the late Professor Walter Williams said that the capitalist becomes rich by pleasing his fellow man. So how is that pleasing manifested in the economic arena? You deliver good service, you deliver good value for money to people who may not be able to produce those goods. And so you go out of your way to produce those goods, provide them in the marketplace, and you're not doing it just because you want to help people. You are doing it purely on a self-interest, enlightened self-interest basis. You, being the capitalist, you want to make improvements on an ongoing basis on your socio-economic situation. That's what you want to do, like everybody else. The
Right.
guy who goes to look for work and knocks on the door, he's doing that on the basis of attending to his socio-economic needs. That's what happens. That is the name of the game. And that is how wealth is created. That is how wealth is created. Now, I really cannot understand why even rich people, people like Bill Gates, and others, they tend to
Yeah.
advocate all these interventionist policies. They tend to. Now, I think maybe I can just hypothesize that, sometimes at the back of their minds and subconscious mind is that there is that biblical, warning that uh, a rich man will struggle to get through a needle
Yeah.
through the hole of a needle and than a camel. Now, words
Mhm.
to that effect. And they feel guilty. I'm going to die at some point now. I'm near at death. I'm advanced in age, and I'm going to leave all this money. What will people think of me? And I think that also plays into this whole mindset.
Yeah, I think it's
That's
part of
my
it.
analysis.
It's one detachment. I think secondly, there's economic illiteracy among the ruling elites in many of these countries. They just don't know how the economy works,
I,
despite
I can't hear you.
I say there's I think there's a few things. I think one is it's economic illiteracy. The rich in these countries, they don't know
Oh,
much about the economy, but they know they
I
themselves
miss
are
you
benefiting
then.
from it. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm here, here. I hear you, then I lose you, kind of thing. Okay, I can hear you now.
Okay. So
Just
I
repeat
say
what you're saying.
I say there's a few things which I think is happening. One, it's the guilt. They rich, the other
There's
are
still a
poor. So they
problem. It's like there is some kind of echo. I can't
echo.
hear you.
You can't hear me at all.
Oh my word. Yeah, I don't think the problem is from my side. I'm not sure.
Mm,
I'm not sure.
not
I
sure. Let
shouldn't say that.
me just
But
ask
can you
my.
hear me clearly?
Yes, I can hear you fine. It's not an issue.
Oh, there you go again. There it goes again.
It goes a bit bad. Ge- Just wait a few seconds. Is it fine now?
I can't hear you.
Okay, let me just ask you, can anyone hear me that's listening?
How to rectify this now technically?
Good question. Good question. No, because I
Come on.
think there's no sound on your side, or how does it work? Oh my goodness. Can you hear me now? Hello, hello.
It's very, very low volume, and sometimes I can't hear a
So
word.
they tell me on my side the sound is okay. I'm not sure if your volume is low or something of the sort. Or maybe it's just a delay.
Still,
That's very interesting. Okay, that's fine. Does anyone here have questions? Let me just can type in this thread. They say they can hear us both. I can hear you as well. So I think it's sound on your side. No, no sound of the sort. That's very interesting. Okay, let me do this. Let me remove him. Ask you to come back in. Now, can you hear me?
still,
It's still low.
yeah, I still cannot hear you.
Wait, let me just kick you out. Do that.
I hear this blip and then
I
silence.
hear you. You're
Cannot hear
fine.
you.
I So two people can
I
hear us, but
didn't touch anything from my side then.
yeah, same here. That's interesting. I think he's on mute. Anyways, okay, let me do that. Kick from studio, kick guest. Let me ask him to come back in. I'll edit this out later. And hello to everyone that's listening. And just by the way, my conversation with Sam Husseini is on Odyssey. I didn't put it on YouTube from yesterday because YouTube was just going to take it off. It's about the origin of the virus. Let's see if the guest can come in. Yeah. I see there's 5 people listening, so hello everyone. Okay, I think I'm going to close this. Thank you all for listening. I'll get him to come back a bit later. Get Temba to come back later. Thanks, everyone.